Greetings everyone and welcome to the Virtual Office Hours. This is episode 12 of our fall 2015 season. My name is John Fee. I'm your host here. I teach American history at Messiah College. Abby Blakeney, our producer, as usual, behind the camera. She's back from Thanksgiving break, which basically means after today we only have two more office hours to do here in our fall season. And as you may recall, we are thinking about the place of America or the role of America, I should say, as a Christian nation, and how people perceived of America throughout much of American history, how people perceive themselves as living in a Christian nation. Some of you may remember that hopefully in July, sometimes in the summer, the second edition of my book, Was America Founded as a Christian Nation, will be out. So we're here revisiting that theme, sort of getting ready for that release. Now, again, just a caveat, I've been making this caveat before. When we talk about the idea that Americans believed that they were living in a Christian nation, we, of course, are stating that historically. That's a historical statement. It's not an ethical statement. It's not a moral statement. So, again, if you want to argue with my premise here that America has always seen itself as living in a Christian nation, what you would need to do is you would need to look at the evidence I've mounted both in the book and over the course of the last 11 episodes and try to suggest that no, Americans didn't think that they were living in a nation that was Christian. That would be a historical critique of what I'm doing, as opposed to a sort of ethical or political critique to say people are wrong for believing that they lived in a Christian nation. This is, again, the difference between historical thinking and other kinds of thinking. My point is, historically, whether they were right or wrong, whether they were following what the founders truly believed, America has always understood themselves as living in a Christian nation, at least up until the 1970s, as we'll see next week or maybe the week after. Today, I want to focus on the civil rights movement. Now, religion and Christianity has been a dominant theme recently among scholars who are writing about the civil rights movement and the way they're writing about the way Christianity informs or had informed the civil rights movement. Thinking here especially of David Chappelle's book, Stone of Hope, in which he points to an Old Testament prophetic tradition that really defined the vision of the civil rights movement. What I want to focus on quickly with you today is I want to think about one particular episode in the civil rights movement, and that is Martin Luther King Jr.'s visit to the city of Birmingham in April of 1963. It's in that year that King comes to Alabama to fight against segregation in that city. Many of you know the story. He is eventually put into prison by the public safety commissioner of the city, Eugene Bull Connor. And while he is in prison, he writes what becomes known as one of his most famous pieces of writing, the letter from a Birmingham jail. Now, that letter is written from prison, obviously, and it's addressed to the white clergy in the city of Birmingham. And most of these white clergy that he's writing to believe that segregation should be handled locally. They don't like King. They think he's an outside agitator who's coming in and disrupting the good order of the city, which is pretty much based upon racial segregation. So King writes this letter. It's published. It's put out into pamphlet form, so it gets eventually gets a kind of national audience. And it's a fascinating argument because on one hand, King is arguing for a nationalist vision, right? If there's injustice anywhere, or injustice anywhere, I should say, is a threat to justice everywhere. In other words, he's challenging localism. He's challenging the idea that local governments, local clergy get to decide what is right and what is wrong on this question of race, and thus challenging segregation in the process. So he appeals to people like Abraham Lincoln and others, these great figures of American nationalism, to say, we have to stop the kind of localism that's going on. We have to stop these local prejudices and local ideas, especially if they're challenging what he believes is justice. And King, secondly, sort of defines justice through his vision of what it means to be a Christian. So he's making constant appeals in Letter from a Birmingham Jail about just laws and unjust laws, right? He's referencing people like everybody from Augustine to Aquinas, to Paul Tillich, the modern theologian. He's going back to the Bible and showing how Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the Old Testament challenged King Nebuchadnezzar, who was putting an unjust law upon them. So this idea of civil disobedience is rooted in the Bible. It's rooted in theology. At the same time, then, King is bringing these two ideas together. This idea of nationalism over localism, and this Christian idea of justice to suggest a new vision for the nation, which is going to be defined by the idea that we are indeed a Judeo-Christian country, and we must live up to the principles not only of our founding fathers, but the principles as well of God. And I think he summarizes this very, very well towards the end of the letter. And if I can just find it here, I want to make sure I get the wording right, where he basically says, he reminds the Birmingham clergy here that he's standing up for, quote, what is best in the American dream and for the most sacred values in our Judeo-Christian heritage, thereby bringing our nation back to those great wells of democracy which were dug deep by the Founding Fathers in their formulation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Again, it's a powerful convergence here of American values, national values, and Christian values. And King is calling us to a sort of different kind of Christian nation, a sort of beloved community in which people are not judged by race or by the color of their skin. So clearly here, even Martin Luther King, a man of the left, a man of the civil rights movement, makes his case based upon many of these Christian nationalist kind of sentiments that we've seen all the way in American history, from all the way back in the early 19th century. We have 2 more episodes to go. We'll hopefully get to the end of the 20th and 21st century here. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.